Hello, welcome to the My Toolbelt. This is Michael, and this is going to be part 2 of the Create Emitters tutorial. We've already gone over several of the options under the Dynamics module in this pull-down menu here, Dynamics, and go to Particles, Create Emitter, and also there's Emit from Object. We're going over both of these. So Create Emitter, we've already talked about Omni and Directional, and also Surface Emitter, which was from the Emit from Object options, Surface. So now we're going to talk about Curve, which is another Surface or Emit from Object option, and then also the Volume Emitter. So first we're going to go over Volume Emitters. So we're going to go to Particle, Create Emitter, Options, Edit, Reset my settings. I'm going to give it the emitter name. Let's just call it a Volume Emitter. Nothing too original. And then emitter type, volume. So with volume selected, we have the volume emitter attributes and volume speed attributes categories in the options window that become available that were not available with any other emitter type. So first, volume emitter attributes, we can choose what shape of volume we want to make. And there's lots of different primitive shapes you can use for your volume emitter. There's cube, sphere, cylinder, cone, torus. And a torus is a donut shape if you don't know that already. So what a volume emitter will do is it will emit particles from a volume of space. A volume of, like a cube, for example. If you have a cube shape, you have particles emitting from that cube shape. And it's kind of similar to emitting from a surface like we went over before with the sphere, except with the sphere it's emitting from the surface, not from in the inside of the sphere. So, but you could get, similar effects if you use a surface emitter and then hide the surface so it's not visible, and then you kind of have a pseudo volume emitter in that way. But using an actual volume emitter gets you a lot more volume emitter specific controls that we're going to see right here. So I'm going to keep them all at default values and just choose cube and create. So this gives us our cube shaped volume emitter right here. So you can see it's kind of a cube shape with this kind of 8 directional arrow pointing out from the center by default. I'm going to change my background to black and hide the grid. That seems to be pretty effective when using particles for the YouTube video. So again, like before, I need to unhide my animation controls so we can play the scene, because that's the only way you're going to get particles to actually emit is by playing the scene. So I'm going to go to Display, UI Elements, and break this UI element window off and unhide the time slider and range slider. And it gives me my animation controls down here at the bottom. And by default I have 24 frames visible in my scene, and that's equal to about 1 second. And we need a little more than that to really get a good number of polygons in the scene, so I'm going to increase this number from 24 frames to say 1,000. Hit enter. So now I have 1,000 frames available. And on the far right of my range slider here, we have this little white box. Click that and it goes to the animation preferences, which is the preferences window, and it kind of shortcuts to the time slider options. The main option we want to look at right now is playback speed, and you want to make sure that play every frame is turned on. Play every frame will make sure that each frame gets played and nothing gets skipped, because if you have it playing back at 24 frames per second, it's going to fly through 24 frames every second regardless of whether Maya is able to keep up, and so that can give you some jankiness in your particles. So play every frame, make sure that the particles render properly. So hit save. So hit the rewind button here in the bottom left. This goes to the first frame, and hit play. And hit stop. So now I have these particles all emitting from my volume emitter. Just like before, we're going to change this to little spheres because these little dots might be a little hard to see based on the resolution of the video you're watching. So I'm going to select the particle, Control A to open the attribute editor here, go to the particle shape tab. I'm going to scroll down to render attributes and change the particle render type to spheres. go into shaded view here, and then I'm going to click the current render type button and change my radius down to something that's a little more manageable. So now we have this. So play that again. Stop. So you see them all coming out of the volume emitter, and it looks very similar to the standard emitter that we had before, coming out of the volume emitter in all directions, just like the emitter that we made before. So I'm going to select the emitter. We don't have to worry about transform attributes right now. And again, we have all the same options in the attribute editor that we have in the create emitter options. Emitter type is volume. That's the same as before. Our rate is still 100 and everything right now. Let's go down to volume emitter attributes, and we can change the shape by changing it here in this pull down menu. There's cube, sphere, and I'm going to get rid of the particles for now. Go back to the first frame. Sphere, cylinder, cone, and then torus. We're going to use cube for now just because it's a bit easier to look at, and we'll look at the other ones after. So volume shape, that just essentially changes the shape of the volume. So away from center is 1. If we change this to, say, 0.1, you can see how the little arrows become kind of dotted lines rather than full lines. Rewind and play, and now you see the particles are much slower. So it's the way from center controls the speed of the particles as they emit away from the center of the volume. But then you have volume offset, and these are 3 boxes here that represent X, Y, and Z. So you can offset the volume emission from the center of the emitter by using these values. So X, Y, Z, let's say Y 10. Let's zoom out a little bit, and you can see that my emitter handle is down here, but then the volume has been offset from that emitter up here 10 units in the Y direction. Then hit play. You can see the particles just come out of the volume up here while the handle for the emitter is down here. And this way you can kind of rotate this around this way, and then particles come out that way, and so on. But it's essentially just volume offset. It offsets the volume from the original position. And then volume sweep and section radius are grayed out because we're using a cube. If we go to sphere, volume sweep becomes available, and the sweep value is 360 by default. If we change this, you can watch the shape of the sphere change, and you're just running the sweep slider back, and you're changing what percentage of the sphere is being used as a volume emitter. If you go to 180, for example, you're using half of a sphere, so it's more of a dome shape. So I hit play now. You can see the particles are not emitting from the half of the sphere that we omitted. So this way you can use a spherical volume emitter but not use the entire sphere if you wanted, say for example, a dome shape. We go to cylinder. Again, we have volume sweep that we can use. It's the same way. And then cone, same way, volume sweep. You can change how much of that cone is being used. And then torus gives you the section radius. Our volume sweep is 360 by default, but you can change that, and you can see how the donut kind of eats away. Someone's taking a bite out of this one. Let's get rid of the particles so you can see it better. So you can change the volume sweep to change how much of the torus is being used for the emitter. And then section radius increases and decreases the scale of the tube that the torus is made of. So you have a much thinner tube or much larger one based on your needs. So those are the options to control the shape of the volume emitter. Let's go back to cube and look at our volume speed attributes. We talked about away from center, as that controls the speed of the particles as they emit from the center of the volume. You can also go negative, and you can see how my little arrows change to be pointing inward. And I hit play. Let's change this to negative 0.1 or something so it's not so fast. And hit play, and you see they're going, kind of being drawn toward the center as they get emitted around in this cube volume. And eventually they'll start coming out the other way because they're just going in and then continue in that direction. So now they're going to kind of come out the other way. Like so. Let's change this back to a positive 1, or 0.1 I should say. So then you have a long axis is 0. If I change this to a positive number, you'll see I have a new arrow appear that is going upwards. Rewind play. Now you'll see that the particles are shooting out of the cube in that direction. And you can just simply rotate the volume emitter to change the direction of the particles. Of course, you can also do a negative number to make it go the other way. So a negative 0.7 along axis. Rewind and play, and they'll go that way. Let's take this back to 0. Rewind, and then we have a round axis. If we increase this value, you can see a new circular arrow appear within the volume. Rewind and play, and you see how the particles kind of spin. Let's change this to 0.7. That seems like a good speed. So it gives them a spin as they get emitted, which is cool. And obviously you can go negative and they'll spin the other direction. Like so. Let's go back to 0 with that one. Random direction. Increase this. It's like a randomizer. So you can see instead of, let's go back to 0 real quick. So with my away from center at 0.1, hit play, you see how they all just emit away from the center of the cube. Rewind and choose random direction. We'll increase this value up, let's say 1, hit play, and now they're going all over the place and not just away from the center point. But the speed of them is still controlled by the away from center slider. So next we have directional speed. This will actually use the direction attributes up here at the distance direction attributes category here to determine a speed direction for the particles coming from the volume emitter. If I change this to 0.5, you'll see I have a new arrow appear, and it's going in the positive X direction because my direction up here is 1 for direction X and 0 for direction Y and 0 for direction Z. If I do 1 in direction Y now, because Y and X both have a value of 1, the direction that the particles will emit in is now in a diagonal between the two. Hit play and you see them all shooting off in that direction. That's using a directional speed value, and so this does not control the direction, just controls the speed of the particles going in that direction, and this will change the direction up here at the distance direction attributes. Now if you change your away from center to 0 and still have a directional speed, you'll see they still move. So this is kind of a multiplier. If directional speed is, say, 5, rewind and play, they're obviously going faster. If your away from center is 5, rewind and play, you can see how that changes the result. So they're going away from center, but also heading in that direction. And you have different speeds to adjust that emission rate. If I change my away from center back to 0 and play, you'll see they're not going out in other directions at all. It's just going in that one direction with the directional speed slider. So just play with those values and to get what you are looking for. I'll go ahead and put that back down to 0 and increase our away from center speed to get more of this result again. So then we have scale speed by size and display speed. Display speed is turned on by default, and that's simply just displaying all these little arrows that help us out on what all these sliders do. If you turn that off, then all these arrows will no longer appear. turn it back on, you have more of an idea of what the particle behavior will be with these little helpers. So this has a long axis, also an around axis, and also away from center. So you get kind of a spreading effect. And you can turn these down while the animation plays and kind of see how it changes. If I turn my along axis down to a negative value, they'll go the other way. Then a round axis up, they'll start spinning more. And away from center to more of a negative value. Anyway, so you can kind of watch how the particles change their behaviors based on these sliders while the animation is playing. But these little arrows and stuff that kind of help you out in what's going on are controlled with this display speed checkbox. Scale speed by size. This will literally change the speed of the particles based on the size of the emitter. If I turn this on, and let's just hit play. Well, let's turn a round axis back to 0, a long axis, we'll say that's 1, and away from center is 0. So we're going to be shooting them out in the y-axis here, or the local y-axis, I should say. Hit play, and you see them all kind of shoot out in that direction. And you can kind of see the speed of how they're moving. If I scale this up, rewind and play, they're shooting out a bit faster. Scale this down to a much smaller scale, play, and they're much slower. So this grayed out slider away from axis, if we changed our volume shape to a cylinder, a cone, or a torus, then away from axis will become available. Let's use torus. So now away from center is grayed out, because technically there is no center since it's a donut shape, but away from axis is available. And we still have our volume sweeps where they were and everything. Let's change these back to their default values. Okay, so now we have our more of a default looking torus emitter. Away from axis, you can see my little arrows that are helping me out here. You can see that the particles will be emitting around this donut shape and all emitting away from the center of the tube. So hit play. They're going in all directions, including inward into the torus. And they're just shooting out everywhere. Again, we can change these sliders and get different results. If I turn away from axis down to 0, you see I have no arrows, nothing. My particles just kind of stay in one spot. Then you have a long axis. So you see these little circular arrows appear. Again, just showing me what's going on and how their particles will behave. And see how they're kind of spinning around. Take this back to 0, around axis. Again, we get our little arrows showing us what's going to happen. They're going to be emitted in the middle of the tube and kind of spin around the axis of the tube, which gives us, frantic cloud of particles. Then you have your random direction and so on, like we had before. Direction speed still applies. They see the particles shoot off in the X direction if that direction is being used. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers volume emitters pretty well. And also you do have, let's take this back down, you do have the show manipulator tool, and if you click that while you have an emitter selected, you do get these little handles that you can control the rate. For example, this one is, there we go, rate. You can just pull these out to change the rate really easily, or pull them in to make it go down. Then you have this little blue circle down here. If you click that, it will choose a different attribute to change. Spread, for example. You can click and drag this handle to change the spread. Click the blue handle again, now you have speed. You can change that value. Click it again, you have normal speed. Change that value. Click it again, tangent speed. Min and max distance. If you drag these out, you can control that setting. just by using these little handles. And some of these won't affect a volume emitter necessarily. They're just going through all of the different settings that we have available. And now clicking at this one last time, I get handles for everything that I can then pull and move all at the same time. That's using the Show Manipulator tool. Alright, the last emitter we haven't talked about yet is the curve emitter. I'm going to show my grid. I'll delete my Omni emitter there. And let's create a curve. Let's go to Create CV Curve Tool. I'm just going to draw a curve on my grid. Hit Enter. Hide the grid and go back to black. That seems to work best with showing off the particles. With my curve selected, I'm going to go to Particles, Emit from Object, Options, Edit Reset, and I'm going to choose Curve. With curve selected, you still have grayed out volume emitter stuff because we're not dealing with volume emitters at all. And we still have all of our other settings from the non-volume emitters. Let's just keep everything by default first and hit Create. And I'll go open my outliner, and you see it made a new particle object. Instead of using the new one, I'm going to delete particle 2, and using the dynamic relationship editor, go to Window, Relationship Editors, Dynamic Relationships. I'm going to choose particle 1, which are my little spheres, and over here choose the emitter button and click on emitter 1 and close that. And now when I hit play, my curve will be used as the emitter for the sphere objects, the sphere particles that I've already set up. So immediately you can see by hitting play that the particles are emitting along the curve, just like we were hoping. If we go back to our emitter and go into the attributes, scroll back up here. Where again, our emitter type is curve. You can change the rate just like before. The scale rate by object size is a little bit different with curves than it is with surfaces. It's based on the length of the curve in centimeters. So if I scale this down, obviously the length is a lot smaller now. Rewind and play and make sure I definitely did check that on. Okay, I didn't. So okay, this is a good example. I'm at frame 80. I'm going to choose my particle and look at the count in the particle shape tab. I have 329 at frame 80. That was with scale rate by object size not checked when I hit play. Now I have it checked now, so I'll rewind, hit play again, going about 80. And now I have 2,134. So you definitely need to watch that scale and make sure you're getting the result you want, because it definitely has a drastic effect on the emission rate. Just turn that off. So I think the other attributes are pretty much the same for curves as they are for other things. You can change direction and so forth. Right now, direction is X, positive X. So when I hit play, they're all kind of moving in that direction. Speed, you still have tangent speed since it is a curve. It does have a tangent. Normal speed and so forth. And yeah, I think that is pretty self-explanatory based on what we've already gone over. So let's look at cycle emission. I changed the Y direction to 1, X to 0, spread to 0.25, increase my speed quite a bit. Rewind and play. Zoom out here some. So I'm thinking spheres may not be the best example. Let's try sprites. So now we get these little boxes here. And you can change a lot of options for the sprites. Let's decrease their scales down a little bit. So right now we just have this steady stream of particles coming up from our emitter. Go back to my emitter tab. So if I just hit play, you just watch these particles for a moment, you can see that, hopefully you'll see there's no real pattern to it. It's just kind of shooting out. Let's rewind and go to cycle emission and turn that on, which unlocks the cycle interval. Now if I hit play right now, you'll see this, and what this essentially is doing is it's taking cycle interval of 1, which means the very first frame, and repeating that every time. So it's just shooting out in these two different directions, because frame 1, we have these two particles going in these directions, and then it's repeating that every time. So you have to, for your cycle interval, you increase this to the number of frames you want it to go before it starts repeating. So let's say 10. Rewind, play. And so now this is repeating every 10 frames. And hopefully you can kind of see, especially like along this line, you can see a very obvious pattern. Like over here you see these, let's pause it real quick. These three particles in this order, these three particles, these three particles, these three, they're just all repeating up in this, every 10 frames is a repeating cycle of particles. So that's using the cycle emission and the cycle interval. This interval is just how many frames you want to use for your cycle, and then cycle emission is just turning it on. So then once you have all this created, you can then render a 10 frame cycle if you like this effect, and play that in your game, and it will just repeat. Alright, so that's I think that's pretty much going over all the basics and some of the more advanced features of using emitters. Hopefully you learned a lot. Hopefully I didn't miss anything important. If I did, definitely let me know. I'll try and go over it. So that's been the Create Emitter options. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, comment. If you have any requests, let me know. And thanks for watching.